Do you seriously think we need to bring all this gear?
You think I brought this all here and I'm not going to use any of it? I absolutely need all this stuff.
No, he doesn't.
I am going to have to borrow another GH5 battery.
Oh, and I suppose I am going to get this one back this time?
I really appreciate how you sometimes let me use your GH5 batteries.
Ooh, do you see how he was stifling in that anger? Because we have to work together all day, but he's very good at packing up gear while pretending he's holding me underwater.
I'm going to use your bathroom before we go. Can you start loading the gear? Mother... Hey again, DPReview TV viewers, it's Jordan Drake here, and you know what that means? We're going to be talking about some video stuff today, specifically Anamorphic. Now, if you didn't get the reference in that opening, it's based on the British show Fleabag. It had a very distinctive, very big budget look to it, and part of that is because they shot that series Anamorphic, so I thought we'd give it a crack at getting a similar aesthetic. Now, I saw that while I was waiting for the brand new Vazen 40mm T2 anamorphic lens for micro four thirds. And we've got a lot of anamorphic lenses out there for Super 35 or anamorphic adapters. This is the first one that we've seen custom built for micro four thirds. And since the GH5 and GH5S are the two best anamorphic cameras out there, it makes a lot of sense. But let me be honest, right now we're shooting on a spherical lens. It's regular 16:9, it's boring, let's change it up. Oh, this is so much better. So now we're shooting on the Vazen 40mm anamorphic, and you can see it's a very different look. We've got a much wider frame on it. We get some cool looking flary patterns that everybody loves. Now, if you're not sure what anamorphic is, essentially the lens captures a squeezed area. This is what we're recording actually looks like that the camera's seeing right now. And then afterwards you would de-squeeze that image out. So you would get the full widescreen, and this is how they used to capture scope anamorphic movies, that extreme widescreen kind of frame, but we can do the exact same thing with digital. Now, I mentioned the GH5, GH5S are the best anamorphic shooting mirrorless cameras out there. Reason for that is, while I'm shooting anamorphic, I can actually see a de-squeezed image while I'm filming without having to bring around a separate monitor to de-squeeze that footage. Just makes it nice, simple. You could almost have a run and gun anamorphic setup, especially because these are stabilized for anamorphics. Now, like all true anamorphics, the Vazen is a big lens, and we're talking 90% of a Nikkor Noct, almost 2 kilograms, and very big as well. Now, there's some downsides and some advantages to that. It is really nice with this big barrel. We've got a 300-degree focus ring, so you can be extremely precise when you're pulling focus, though it does mean it's difficult to quickly snap focus yourself. You'll really want to have a follow focus system for that. Also, it's a 110mm filter thread, and you're not going to find a lot of filters, especially inexpensive ones, that'll mount on that. I do really think you want to use this with a matte box, but it probably makes sense to get lens support for it anyways, because this is such a big lens. If it's going to be bouncing around a lot, it's going to be pretty hard on your lens mount. I also like that this is a T-stopped lens, so you can tell how much light is actually being transmitted through it when you're matching it with other cinema lenses. And the aperture ring feels excellent, quite a bit better actually than the focus ring, which feels a little bit loose, a little bit sloppy. I'd really like to see that tightened up before this lens gets to market. So a 40mm on a micro four thirds sensor might sound like an 80mm full frame equivalent, very close to a portrait focal length. However, this is a 1.8 anamorphic, so once we apply that de-squeeze to it, we wind up with something pretty close to a 45-50mm normal lens. I think that's why Vazen started with this focal length. It's a very nice, versatile starting point for them. One thing you might fight with quite a bit is that the minimum focus on these lenses is actually quite poor, 3.7 feet from the lens mount, so you might wind up picking up diopters to force that focus closer, or extension tubes if you need to do any kind of close-up work. So let's talk about the actual performance of the Vazen lens. And bear in mind that this is an extremely affordable lens as far as anamorphics are concerned, as hard as that may be to believe. To get acceptably sharp 4K footage, I found I was constantly stopping this lens down to about T4 to T8 really seems to be kind of its sweet spot. You can certainly open it up, T2, T2.8. You get very interesting shallow depth of field, especially with that cool anamorphic perspective. However, it is not terribly sharp, and I definitely don't recommend shooting at those wide apertures if you're planning to use the 6K anamorphic mode that's offered on the GH5. Now, this lens is also quite prone to loca, or longitudinal chromatic aberration, where we get purple and magenta. Anytime you're pointing it at something where you've got bright highlights in the foreground and background, you will definitely see some color shift. As well, breathing is pretty pronounced on this lens. Again, that's very common with anamorphic lenses, but if you're snapping focus like we did in the intro, you will definitely notice the frame changing quite a bit, and it'll draw attention to those focus pulls. Now, I'm sure you all want to know about flare with this lens. And you do get a ton of it. It is very prone to flare. If you're looking for plenty of cool blue flares horizontally streaking across, this lens will definitely deliver. One great thing about this lens working so well with the GH5 is I was actually able to take it out and shoot some anamorphic photography. And I really love the look of this ultra wide frame, but with a fairly flat perspective on it. Now, when you're shooting photos with the GH5, you're not going to be able to see the de-squeezed image through the viewfinder. It's kind of like shooting film that way. I was kind of guessing at my composition. Once I de-squeezed the image, you could see like, oh, that kind of worked, or that shot does not work at all. But it was a fun experiment, and I think I'm going to do a lot more of it. So you might be wondering how this compares to other budget anamorphics on the market. The main one is the SLR Magic Anamorphic, which is a 1.33 lens designed for 16:9 sensors, and I've always been disappointed with that lens. Now, I haven't used it out in the field. I've always had it in controlled situations or trade shows, but I've always found it's very soft, even at T5.6, T8, anywhere in there. And the build quality as well just feels very cheap. I do have some issues with the build on the Vazen, but it does feel like a much more solid lens. Now, interestingly, Sirui, best known for making tripods, is also going to bring out an anamorphic lens in the near future. Again, a 1.33 designed for 16:9 sensors, but it's going to be under $1,000. So I'm very curious to check that out. For the time being, though, I do think the Vazen is probably the best budget anamorphic that I could see using on a professional sense. I probably won't buy one, but I could totally see renting one if it became available in my area. I remember a few years ago, a company named Vazen was planning to bring out a series of Micro Four Thirds anamorphics. I was really looking forward to those and so disappointed when they never materialized. So the Vazen, also starting with a V, seems like kind of a rebirth of that concept. For its price, if you're interested in anamorphic, it is a somewhat affordable lens option. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure that you follow us on Twitter, Instagram. Let us know in the comments below if you like this kind of filmmakery specific things, or if you want to see more anamorphic photographs, and we will see you again very soon.